from Bob, and he says, do you have any pointers on eliminating / reducing pick noise? And I thought about this a little bit because I have, in the studio, you have this like kind of microscope on your playing, and you hear back all of the things, all of the timing things that you might need to work on, but also your tone, and you hear back kind of the sound that you're hearing with the metal picks on the metal strings. And it's hard to get around playing with metal on metal and not hearing a sound. You are going to hear a sound ultimately, but I think a lot of it has to do with the angle of your hand on the strings. And so, putting your finger picks so they're coming straight onto the strings like that is going to cause a little bit more pick noise than your hand being at an angle. And I think being at an angle allows you to kind of slide your pick onto the string, and that might sound like it creates more pick noise, but I've experimented with this, and if you kind of like gradually slide your pick onto the string instead of just putting it on the string, there will be less pick noise. If you want to see what that looks like on my instrument, this is how my right hand usually is, and you can see that my finger pick is kind of angled on the strings instead of coming straight. Whoa. All right, and that is why we keep the mute button pushed down. Sorry about that. It blew me out a little bit. But we got it under control. All right, so anyways, you got your fingers on the string so that it's angled instead of coming straight through the string. And I don't know if you can see it, but on my picks, you probably can't see it, I have a worn down area where I'm actually playing warm, where my pick is hitting the string. And it's just kind of like on this left side of the pick. So, and I can tell I need to get new picks because I have like kind of it looks like it's almost a serrated edge where I've been playing with this pick too long. And that's another thing. You might have to replace your picks because they do wear down. They're pieces of metal and they're hitting metal, so they're going to wear down a little bit. But I would say, Bob, if you can practice your hand position and make sure that your finger is sliding off the string at an angle instead of hitting it straight on. I can't even really do it. I mean, the way that you put on your picks is also another thing. So you can put your picks on so they're angled a little bit. And that's how I usually adjust mine so they're not coming straight off. Another thing that I'll do, and I did this at a rehearsal today, is I take the leather of my strap. This is kind of like an old trick that I heard from a banjo player when I was living in Greensboro and learning. And you can rub your finger pick on the leather, on the inside of the leather strap, and that will help get kind of the whatever grease or something, and you can look at it and it's a little bit shinier. I mean, you probably can't see it through the camera, but when I'm looking at it, it gets it a little bit more polished so you don't have that dust or debris or whatever it is on the string, on the pick, and that sometimes helps with pick noise. So there's those two things. And experimenting with different finger picks. These are Hofmeier picks, and these are really good. They're about $20 a set, but they're the closest to, if I can find them, I have a pair of Old Nationals around here, but they're the closest to Old Nationals that I've found. And they're made by this guy named Dean Hofmeier. I think he's in Virginia. Really great picks. The Dunlops are okay. They sound a little thin to me. And the Old Nationals just don't sound great to me. They don't feel good. They don't fit on my fingers that well. Okay, so Timothy has a couple questions about kicking off and ending songs. And this kind of leads into the other questions that I got through the form. And he said, I'm still basically a beginner. At a festival I went to, most of the musicians used what seemed to be simple licks to start off their songs. They seem to serve the same function as counting off 2, 3, 4 in terms of giving the group the tempo and starting the downbeat. Can you show us how to do a couple variations of that and maybe how to modify for different keys? In a similar vein, there seem to be some fairly common simple licks to end a song. Currently at jams, I awkwardly stop playing, which we all go through that phase. That only works about half the time and not well, as someone else is likely to pick up the melody and go around the tune again. Most of these songs are designed to go around in circles. How do I free myself from my never-ending Cripple Creek loop? That is a good question. Let's start with the first one, with kickoffs. And the other questions I got: can you explain the concept of chord tones? What's the best way to start playing in C or D without a capo? So those kind of all tie into how do you kick off songs, and what are some common kickoffs in G, but also in C or D, for example. So let's talk about that a little bit. The melodies for most of these vocal tunes and most of these fiddle tunes start either on the 1, the 3, or the 5 of the chord. So what that means is if you're in the key of G, it either starts on this note, the G note that's open, the B note, which is the second string, or the D note. So 3 examples of kickoffs that include each of those right off the bat is, so that starts you off on the G. It sets the tempo and leads you into that G note. Like that. You know, I would count it off still. I would say 1, 2, 3. Or some people even go faster than that and they say 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And by the way, this is a great thing to do with a metronome. Like, some people are just not good at kickoffs, and you can tell that they haven't practiced that with the metronome. So it's a really great thing to practice. So you have that one that leads into the G chord, or the G note. And so you could say I can do that just for the B string if I wanted to. And you could totally do a walk-up for the B string, but there's a more bluegrassy sounding one. And instead of landing on our second string like that, we're actually going to slide into that note on the 4th fret. Like that. Or like that. So it's another kickoff: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That will lead you into that 3rd scale degree melody note. And then finally, you have the 5th scale degree, which is the D string. So remember, our 1 is the G. That's the key that we're in. That's why we call it the 1. And then the 3 is the B. And the 5th scale degree is the 5. And these are all chord tones in the key of G. And they're all the starting notes that you're going to start with for vocal songs and for fiddle tunes. Some songs will start on a 4 chord, or they'll start on a 5 chord. In this case, we're just talking about songs that start on the 1 chord. But even in the case of starting on the 4 or the 5 chord, they're going to start with chord tones in that 4 chord or chord tones in that 5 chord. We'll get into that in a little bit. So the 5th scale degree, how do we kick off a song with that in mind and with that melody being played? Well, you can do this. So that's leading up to the 5th. And you can also go. That's another really good one. And these are simple, you know. This is like 4 pinches in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, it's not a difficult thing to get down, and you can easily do it and sound like a bluegrass player. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Like that. If we wanted to start on the 3rd scale degree. So instead of sliding up to the 4th fret, I started up to the 3rd fret. As like a variation, you know, I'll do a different kickoff for Old Home Place than I'll do for I'll Stay Around. You know, those both start on the B, on the 3rd scale degree, but I might do something different for each of those just to give myself some variation. But the coolest thing is when you check out what like J.D. Crowe does for Old Home Place or I'll Stay Around, he played on both of those tracks, is hearing what he does differently between both of those tracks and kind of picking up what's going on there. You could do a whole listening session on kickoffs based on like the way that Scruggs played and the way that JD played. And then there's this whole thing, you can go into melodic style playing, but the main thing is learning how to hear a song and hear what the vocalist is doing. So say the vocalist is going, it's been 10 long years since I left my home, or whatever. You can hear that. It's been 10, dun, dun. You can kind of take away the vocals, listen to what's going on in the melody, and then put that on your instrument. And that takes practice. You know, you got to go to the jam session with that kind of in mind, in your sights, and then just practice that. Make that your intention of the jam session that you're going to. So that's G, and we're using, remember, 1, 3, and 5 chord tones in the key of G. Does this all make sense right now? Cool. So what if we're in the key of C? In the key of C, we just have to identify our chord tones, and we can do similar kickoffs for the key of C than similar kickoffs to the key of C as the key of G, but it's going to be a little bit different because your positions are different. We're still using open strings, and our chord tones are C, that's our 1, E, which is our 3rd, and then G, which is our 5th. So let's work backwards a little bit. Let's start with the 5th. And how would we do the same kickoff in C as we did in G? Well, our G1 was, so if we analyze that, we know we started on that B note. We started right here, and then we just went chromatically up. So how do we create that in the same key? Well, we find where our 3rd is. If we can identify where our 3rd is in the key of C, which I already told you, it's this note. So now we just kind of connect the dots. Like that. And I was doing a little bit more there, but the basic thing is not much to it. You know, you're just connecting these on one string. And then I'm putting my chord down. So I'm also aware of the other chords that are happening. So not just this C chord, which is a good one to know. It's essential. You have to know the C chord, but also this bar chord. And I can use those notes. I can fill out the chord with the notes on this fret for C chord. And then we go to the 4 chord, which is an F. Anyways, so that's our 5th, walking up to our 5th. So say someone's singing Bury Me Beneath the Willow in the key of C, which is bury me beneath the willow, under the weeping willow tree. So you kick it off, 1, 2, 3. Like that. So using the chord tones and walking up. So what if someone was kicking off Old Home Place in the key of C? So Old Home Place, as I mentioned before, starts on the 3rd of the chord. So we have to identify where that is first, which we did. 3rd is right there. It's that E note. And so whenever I'm kicking off a song, I always try to hum the melody before I kick it off. So I have that in my head. I can use it as a reference. Because if you're not humming the melody beforehand, you're kind of going in blindly. And you'll maybe catch yourself. You'll find the melody as you play it, but it's much more of kind of like a pro musician's way of doing it if you can hear it in your head first and then play it out loud. So that being said, I'll try to find the melody of Old Home Place in the key of C. Just try to strum that first chord. You know the first note is, been 10 long years since I left my home. Obviously, it's really high. 10 long years since I left my home. Okay. So what I would do for a C kickoff. So listen to that one more time. It's pretty straightforward. I'm not doing much fancy stuff there. I'm just going G on my third string, and then second string with the C down, open first string, and then putting my third on. So I'm aiming for this note. And you can, you know, mess around with it and try to figure out other ways to do it. I mean, or 1, 2, 3. You know, you can do a little chromatic walk up there. You just want to make sure, this is the most important part, is that when you're leading the kickoff, that you come in on the downbeat, that you come in on the 1 and you're like strong and confident about that melody note. Because some people will be thrown off by you. Generally speaking, people will just keep on plugging. You'll just have to kind of find your spot. But it's a really important thing that when you're, you know, you say you're going to kick off the song, that you nail it. You know, you at least get the kickoff, and then, you know, you can fumble in other places if you need to, but at least get that kickoff so people know where you are. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's the third in the key of C. And now we're going to go into the fifth. So, we started with the fifth. We're going to go to the root. The root's pretty easy because you can do the same exact walk up in the key of C that you did in the key of C, key of G. I should get my keys mixed up. So instead of going, you're going to go. And I'm doing this little pinch beforehand that makes it sound more legitimate, kind of bluegrassy sounding. So I'm going, and the count off will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. You notice I'm dropping my thumb down to the second string. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So that's an easy one. You could go. I just think that kind of sounds unclear in a way. You want to make sure that you're counting stuff off and that's really clear. So I think simpler is better for these count-offs. So just to go over that stuff. That's the one up to the fifth. And then up to the third. So that's up to the third. And then to the root. Like that. So I would encourage you not to just practice this, especially in the key of C, not to just practice it down here. And this is kind of getting into Simone's question about what's the best way to start playing in C or D without a capo? And it's knowing your position. So knowing where you can do this stuff. Because you can do a kickoff right here. But you could also go, because you know where that C chord is. Then you can find the other chords around that C chord. So, you know, if that was Old Home Place, I was trying to find the melody there. So, oh wait, so the Old Home Place melody starts on the third, sorry. You would go, something like that. So I'm walking up to that third on the 14th fret. It's all out of positions. So we have this position, we have the ball, we have the root position, and then we have this position again. And if you don't know this already, this position is the same as this position down here. It just looks different. I kind of regard this nut as like the 0th fret, but this is also the same chord as the 0th fret. So the neck starts over at the 12th fret. You probably already know that, but just so you know, this is the same chord as down here. So whatever you do down here to this chord, you can do up here to this chord. And you can do it here too. And then, you know, there's like all of these possibilities exist if you know your chord positions. And so once you know your chord positions, you can, you know, you can just put a simple forward roll on it out of this chord position and you sound legit, you know. I mean, you might need to add a little bit more eventually, but I mean, that's not, I'm not doing much for Old Home Place. Well, that was a little fancy. But the beginning of it is just in time with good tone, and it sounds good. So that's kind of something that I say a lot on the banjo by ear side. You don't have to sound like Scruggs to make it sound really good. Like, I think it's a good goal to be able to play ground speed and all of these Scruggs songs, but you don't have to do that to make it sound good. I definitely started there and have studied that stuff, but this doesn't sound like Scruggs. You know, this sounds like, I don't know, a combination of a ton of influences. But it's the melody and it's tasteful, and that's the most important thing. Okay, so we talked about C a lot, and D is essentially the same thing. You're not doing much other than playing around the chord positions. And so just to kind of find those first, that's our first step. We'll do that, and then we'll go into figuring out where the melodies are or where the kickoffs are. You know, in these, I'm thinking of the chord tones being, I mean, they're all throughout the chord. The chord tones are just the notes in the chord. But the ones on the first string are the ones that I'm going to be walking up to. I mean, you guys know your chords, and I hope you do. And if you don't, go learn them, because that's the first step to all this. Make sure you do know this stuff, and then you can switch easily between. Okay, so let's talk about D a little bit. D is one of my favorite positions to play out of because you get the D string to like drone with, and that's the coolest thing about it, I think, is that when you put on your index finger on the 2nd fret, 3rd string, and you just play, you put a slide in there, it just sounds so rocking, you know, for a banjo. And there's a lot more to this, obviously. You can play a lot more different positions, as I showed you, but there's so much that you can do with just this shape. And for example, if you're going to lead up into the 5th of the chord, this is the A, so this is the 5th of the D chord, the 5th scale degree, you could go like this. 1, 2, 3. For whatever reason, I'm hearing the record old 97 in my head. But that's leading up to the 5th. And so if you wanted to lead up to the 3rd, our 3rd is right here. It's our F sharp. 1, 2, 3. You could do a more chromatic one. 1, 2, 3. So notice where I counted those off. I waited a little bit after 3. Actually, I started on 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can start on 4, and it'll be a shorter count off. Most of the times, people are expecting kind of that and of 3 count off. 1, 2, 3. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 2 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. By the way, for D, I would usually spike my 5th string. Okay, so Another thing, and maybe you know the song Nellie Kane. Nellie Kane starts on the root of the chord. It's in the key of E, but I think P plays it out of a D position. So it starts off with that. So remember that in the key of C, in the key of G. It's all the same. It's just based out of a different position and a different chord. You can do it in E. And it's out of the D position, or what I call the first inverted chord. So that's the D position. So just for a moment, try doing this in like the key of E flat. Like, where's your E flat chord? In the D position. Your E flat chord's on the 5th fret. So if you're going to kick off Nellie Kane in the key of E flat, which no one would want you to do, you can do that walk up. And this is such a great thing to practice because it gets you out of your like comfort zone a little bit and gets you doing this in a different context. And you can even put in a little pinch beforehand. So like 1, 2, 3. In the key of E flat. So 1 and 2 and 3. You don't have to go on after that. But the pinch is really kind of like a nice bluegrassy touch to it. It gives you a little pop, a little punch, wakes people up. And then you can move it back to D. And then do it out of there. Doesn't sound right in E flat. So yeah, that's walking up to the root. And you can do that in G if you want to. You don't have to do it just at a D. If you wanted to play a melody up there that starts on the root. It's all about positions. That's really what it comes down to, is like really knowing your positions and being able to manipulate the notes inside of those positions, those chord tones. It's all about chord tones. If you know, it's all about the positions and knowing the chord tones that exist in the positions. So let's talk about moving up the neck for D. So we have and then what if we went so up to that F sharp? I'm just locating where the chord tones are on the first string now, and I'm doing chromatic walk-ups to those. So I'm starting on an open D string and just chromatically walking up. Well, I'm skipping the E flat, but I'm going D and then E on the 2nd fret, and then chromatically from there. And that will get you in this D position. That's our next one. This is the same thing as we did in C. You find your F sharp. And then chromatically walk up, and it's out of your bar chord. And then you can start right there on your first string, or you can start on the 2nd string. There's so many different ways to do it, and it's good to know multiple ways. Because they sound different, this one sounds distinctly different to me than doing it all on your first string. They're the same notes, but it's just a tonal thing. Maybe just because I'm sitting here, my ears right up to my banjo, basically. And then you can keep going if you want to, but it's just walking up to chord tones. and doing that in all of the different positions on the neck. So let's talk about chord tones a little bit, because they're really important for improvisation. And you don't need to know how to do it in the way that a jazz player does it when they're working on their 2/5s and making sure they're moving from like an A minor seventh to a D seventh to a G major seventh and getting all of the chord tones like lining up perfectly. I think just a basic knowledge of what are the chord tones in D, what are my possible notes I can play or start on in D, and then also knowing what are my chord tones in the 4 and the 5 chords in that key. So knowing, okay, so I'm in the key of D, my 4 chord is a G chord. What are my chord tones in the key of G? And chord tones are just the notes in the chord. And then I'm still in the key of D, and then I'm looking at my 5 chord. My 5 chord is an A chord. What are the chord tones in my A chord? And the reason why this is important is because all of the melody notes, especially all the vocal melody notes that you hear, are going to be chord tones or really close to a chord tone. There's a lot of inflections that people do when they're singing, but usually they're landing on a chord tone. And let's just go back to Old Home Place and analyze it a little bit. So, if I'm in the key of G, and it's 10 long years. So we got to know where the chords change. And so 10 long years since I left my home. We all know that's G, B, C. So 10 long years. So that's an A note over a B chord. Does anybody know what chord tone that is in relationship to the B chord? And if you do know, you can put us in the chat box. But I see some people maybe jumping up to type. Yeah, I see Scott. Yeah, it's a flat 7. So flat 7 is a really important chord tone for us to know about as well. It's not as important as the 1, 3, or 5, but it's still a really good one for us to know about. And it's it's an example of where you find it in Old Home Place. This is a B. I know this is a really weird looking B7th chord, but it's the 7th, the flat 7 in the B chord. So if we analyze it and then go on to the next chord, it's a C. So let's go back to our melody. It's been 10 long years since I. It's a G. So it's the 5th in the C chord. I left my home. And so home is the 5th in the G chord. So it's a D. So this is a great example of like the roadmap that these chord tones will give you. It's not like the end all be all. I think the end all be all is like being able to use your ears and figure out a melody like that. Like 10 long years since I left my home. That's not a complicated melody. Like, could you learn that right now in the key of C and just start? Find your first note. 10 long years since I left my home. Give yourself these like mini challenges of learning it in a different key that you're not so comfortable in, because they're not hard melodies. I think the most challenging part for people is learning the melody, but then putting the roll pattern on top of the melody. Like, how do I combine the roll and the chords and the melody all together so it sounds like Scruggs style? But learning the melody is not difficult. I think people just don't do it that often. It's not something that they practice. So I'd encourage you to do that. Like, practice learning the melody and start analyzing, is that a chord tone? What is this note in relationship to what's going on in the chord? I mean, that's how music students practice and analyze music. That's what I did in jazz school. It's like I would learn, Green Dolphin Street. It's like a jazz standard. And the teacher would be like, all right, so now analyze all the chords. And we'd have to like go through and like look at the chords and write out what number they are and kind of write out every chord and like what notes are in each chord and then the chord substitutions. It was really complex, but it was so helpful for my development. And now I really understand how to navigate some jazz changes, not all of them, but it's helped my bluegrass playing too, to be able to know like this note is being played during this chord. What does it mean? Like, what is its relationship to the chord? So I think that's really important. And learning the chord tones is going to help. Like learning, okay, so I know that my banjo is tuned to an open G. Like, what's this note? That's a G. Okay, so it's the 1. What's the 4th string? It's a D. Okay, that's the 5. G is the 1. The B is the 3rd. And like kind of understanding that and understanding, okay, why are these chord tones called 1, 3, and 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's scale degrees in the G major scale. We all can sing a G major scale. It's just it's just understanding how to identify the scale degrees. So bum, 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 bum. And then there's the whole, on top of all that I'm talking about, like understanding how to learn this stuff by ear and hear the interval changes, which is ultimately where we want to get at the jam session, is being able to play stuff by ear. You know, first time you hear a song, all right, no problem. Let me just listen to it a couple times, figure out the first note, and then just go into it, dive into it. And that comes from a lot of practice, a lot of going to the jam sessions, but also just knowing your instrument and having a good relationship between your ear and your instrument, which takes time as well. But, you know, practice. We get better at things every single day. If you practice every single day, you'll get better at it. If you read tab every single day, you'll get really good at reading tab. Like I did that. I got really good at reading tab, and I can still read tab pretty well. But I didn't want to stretch that or practice that muscle. I wanted to make what seemed to me be a more important tool, my ears, be at the kind of focus of my practice. So, you know, you get better at what you practice. And if you start practicing this, like take Old Home Place and try to figure it out, the melody in a couple different keys tonight, you'll just get better at it tomorrow and you'll get better at the next day. I think it's really important stuff. Yeah, so I don't have any more questions from people. Does anybody have questions about what we talked about tonight? If you do, you can either put your hand up or type it in the chat box. But if not, thanks so much for joining me. And our next Q&A call is on the 18th of January. So mark your calendars for that. And you can send in your questions at any point throughout the month, and I'll add them to the list to be talked about during these calls. Yeah, and if you feel like you want to have something answered, if you didn't get something answered tonight that you want to get answered, type in your question. Like, I really want to hear everybody's stuff, and chances are other people have the same question as you. That's just generally how it goes. I'll send out a reminder a few days before, and I'll send out a link a few days before. Roger, is there a tab for Ryan Kavanaugh's Flight of the Bumblebee? Let's email about that, because I'm not sure where that is in the library or on YouTube. He might have something to send you. If not, I can get you a little starter tab for it. I don't know if I can tab out the whole piece, but it's all chromatic, so that's a really good exercise as well. But yeah, thank you guys, and practicing some different keys tonight. And yeah, do that ear training. All right, I'll see you.